I first have to ask, I mean, walking down these hallowed halls, it's pretty impressive and a little bit intimidating too, but having won the office now, do you find you have a few pinch me moments?
You know, I did at first, but now I really feel comfortable in the role. I worked very hard to be in this position, not just ascending to it back in August of 2021, but having had a chance to be elected by the people of New York. It's inspiring to me. I feel that I owe that to the people of the state of New York, give them my best every single day. So it's humbling, but it's also empowering to know that I have a state, I have a lot of people counting on my success, and they want me to be successful.
Absolutely. And as you know, this is Women's History Month. What was it like to be a woman in politics in the 80s and 90s compared to today?
Oh, world of difference. You know, we're starting to see breakthroughs. You look at the state legislature today. When I was an intern back in the late 70s for the Assembly, there were so few women. And I was the only young woman working in an office. I'd work by day for the Assembly office, which is the old Donovan building. And I'd go over to the Genesee building, which is the headquarters of the Democratic Party. There were so few women, no young women. So today, more women are getting elected. They're assuming their rightful roles in the halls of power, whether it's here, the New York City legislature, or I'm sorry, the New York City Council had no women, to speak of, other than maybe 9 or 13 is a small number. Now they're more than half. I look at the Buffalo City Council. We have some progress to be made there, but people are starting to say, yes, of course women should be there. And that was not the case when I was starting out in my early days in politics. A huge difference today.
And there are more women who are throwing their hat in the ring right now as we speak and running for Common Council in Buffalo. So you're right, it absolutely, representation makes a big difference. Who were the women that you looked up to back in the day? There weren't many.
There were so few women when I was younger. There was one woman who was lieutenant governor, Marianne Krupczak, and I had actually worked on her campaign when Hugh Carey was running, so I knew of her story. But there weren't many women. Bella Abzug, and you heard about her, and Shirley Chisholm. But I didn't have any role models coming out of Western New York at all to look at their career later in life. Hillary Clinton was someone that I paid attention to very closely when, how she took the role of our senator. I worked with her when I was on the town board in Hamburg. And so, again, I'm hopeful that young women today have plenty of women to look at. They can look at the stories of others. In fact, in our capital, we're going to be positioning a replica of Ruth Bader Ginsburg, her face up in the $1 Million Staircase, and putting her among now the 7 other women out of 77. So there are some role models like Ruth Bader Ginsburg who had overcome a lot in her life. One of the first women in a big law firm, very few women in law school at the time, trying to start a family.
Right. Jewish woman too.
Jewish woman, her position on the court where she really made a name for herself, but inspired. She was in her 80s, and there was this whole generation of young women who were just inspired by her tenacity and her character and how tough she was. So there are more women now than there ever were, so I don't think we have a shortage. Right. But we always want to make sure that we're looking back. The women like myself who've been successful, even in the early days when it was tougher, we have a responsibility to make it easier for the next generation and to reach back to them and offer them internships and position in administration. I have so many women in my administration. And I look at this as a farm team. They should run for office someday. They have so much to give, and I really have incredibly talented women, and I'm really proud that I could open the doors to them as well as in my cabinet. So
that's great. That was one of my questions, is the role of what responsibility do women leaders have today, and that fits the bill perfectly. Were there any opportunities, though, early on, or incidents, I should say, where you felt people weren't taking you seriously, or that you experienced a little bit of misogyny? Did that happen, and how did you react to it then?
Even the decision to run for town board, I came out of a world where women were the staffers. I was an attorney. I'd worked in a law firm in Washington. I'd also been an attorney for Senator Daniel Patrick Moynihan, which was, a pretty big deal in Washington. I go back to Hamburg, and there were no women on our town board. There were so many women to look to, and I didn't think I could even run for that position until a friend of mine, Tom Catroci, was 22 years old, and he decided to run for an opening on the town board. And I was in my 30s, had a family, had a home, and he was just right out of college. And I realized that women sometimes have to step up themselves, even though it's not comfortable. You might be the only woman. I was the only woman until we had an opening, and I said the next opening is going to go to another woman. So I made sure that we went from no women to one woman to then we had 50% women just in a few short years by bringing on Joan Kesner. So I've experienced it. I know what it's like to be the only woman in the room so many times, even now sometimes, but I'm very comfortable in that role. I just know that that's the price of being in a position where you have a voice, and I want other women to see that. Sometimes you have to break down the barriers, break that glass ceiling, but it is so worthwhile.
Western New Yorkers know you. They know your reputation for hard work, for tenacity, but when you came to state prominence, there were other headlines. Some people calling you the luckiest person in politics and the accidental governor. Did that offend you? And what did you actually think when you heard that?
They just didn't know me. They just didn't know me, and I knew it over time they would. I had an opportunity to get out there to literally run for the office and to have to win it the old-fashioned way. It was not easy, and people learned from me that a lot of people realize in Western New York, I'm often underestimated. You come from Western New York, we haven't had a governor from Buffalo since Grover Cleveland, so just that whole idea that someone from upstate and Buffalo could be a governor was very foreign to a lot of people, and so there was a lot to overcome there, and also being the first woman. You know, this was a model of governance that they expected had to be a certain, you know, it's male, it's, you know, a tough image, and I had to overcome that and say, women are very tough. Women are very tough. Don't underestimate us.
But Governor, what advice might you want to give for women who might be hesitant to come into state government given the scandal of the previous administration? Some young women might be deterred by that.
No, we are working very hard and have been successful in changing the culture. Absolutely. It's by bringing more women into the corridors of power overall so they see other women. Women who've had shared experiences, who know how tough it can be and looking out for each other. It's a different culture altogether. So they should never be hesitant. You know, if there is harassment, we have a whole different way of dealing with it. We've changed our policies dramatically. So that should never be a reason women don't want to at all, and that because of fear of harassment. But if there ever is harassment, there's no tolerance, zero tolerance here in our state government.
It's reassuring to hear, certainly. Let's talk about your budget. So much of your budget proposal is really preparing New York State for the future, and climate change is a big part of that, and the Climate Act in particular. The latest polls show, though, that Western New Yorkers specifically don't support some aspects of the Climate Act that have to do with banning the use of fossil fuels for heating and for their gas stove. I mean, I love my gas range, but more importantly, the practicalities of being a Western New Yorker. When we had 47 people die in our last blizzard and tens of thousands we reported had lost power. So with climate extremes increasing that create these storms, I mean, critics say that all electric heating really makes us more vulnerable and makes storms more deadly in places like Western New York and upstate New York when we lose our heat source. What do you say to those critics?
No, and I'm happy to have a conversation about this. We're talking about a transition that's going to happen over time. I mean, you enjoy your gas stove, keep your gas stove. No one's touching your gas stove. And so what happens is, you know, people who, you know, many of the voices are, you know, supporters of the fossil fuel industry.
Will my gas stove be exempt, or will there be a time of its useful life
that
I'll...
You keep it. When you want to replace it, you replace it. You know, we're talking about new houses being built that are wired for electric.
Good. That was a misconception.
Oh,
so
absolutely.
People can keep their gas stove.
Keep
Great.
your gas stove. You know, even in the future, you know, commercial kitchens, it's a different environment. We're talking about new buildings would have an alternative form, just like we transition off of coal. Right. I mean, there's a time when people had wood-burning fireplaces. And so we're simply at that point in history where we need to transition to something that ultimately is going to be cheaper. When people ultimately, you know, this generation, the next generation, they'll be grateful that we're able to wean ourselves off of fossil fuels for environmental reasons, but also, you know, national security. I remember the OPEC oil wars back in the 70s when gasoline was rationed, that we were reliant on foreign oil from the Arab states, and they withheld production to have leverage over us politically. So there's a lot of geopolitical circumstances. I like the idea that our power can come from Niagara Falls. hydroelectric power or wind turbines in Western New York.
Well, let's speak about the power grid. As a Niagara University grad, we had the Robert Moses Power Project right in our backyard. So the grid is also vulnerable potentially, but you do understand people who are fearful that in the winter, if they lost their heat, if there was no electric heat, where would they go? What would they do? Would we need an entirely new plan for people to go? Where would they go for heat? Wouldn't that really put lives at risk if there's not fossil fuel heating available?
No, we are working on a smooth transition to a reliable power source that is going to have backup generators, backup batteries. There's no transition until we're ready for it. So that's why I want to eliminate the fear that's associated with it. Just as there was a misrepresentation that seized all the headlines and the hysteria around we're taking your gas stoves, that is not true. And nor is it that we're going to shut down the ability for people to use gas power at this time. It's a transition over time, but we're not going to get there until we're ready with all the backup energy storage sources that people will be able to rely on if the power goes down during a storm. I will make sure that. I'm from Buffalo. I lived through that blizzard. I was literally there and witnessed what happened. And so this is personal to me, and I'll make sure that people can alleviate the fear that they may have around this. And I want to have honest conversations about what we're talking about.
Very good, thank you. Let's talk about affordable housing. Something else really important in Buffalo is the fourth poorest city in the nation. Your New York Housing Compact goal is to create 800,000 more homes. Some local leaders, though, worry about your plan a little bit because they fear that you would take away their power to make those zoning decisions for their community, the decisions that they feel are best for the people that elected them. How do you answer that critique?
I answer this with the experience of someone who served in local government for 14 years. My town board, I worked with the planning board, the traffic safety board, the zoning board of appeals, and I know all the ways that communities can encourage housing to be built, not just affordable. We're talking about all levels of housing. Senior citizens who grew up in a community who want to be able to have that townhouse or condo to downsize to so they don't have to go to Florida. They want to be around their grandkids. Or young families starting out that can grow up in the same town that they were educated, they started life in. And so that's not going to happen if we don't start building. So what we're simply saying to communities, show us your plan. Show us where you want to put housing. Show us whether you want to have an apartment building, take an old strip plaza, an old mall, an old warehouse, and convert that into housing, like we've seen great success in downtown Buffalo. But also, if you want to put up new housing, if there's costs associated with it, we can help with the cost of sewers and roads and schools, because the greater policy objective is to make sure that we don't lose this opportunity to attract more people. People want to live in New York. They really do, but affordability, public safety is number one in people's minds. That is my primary focus. Number two is affordability. Affordability comes down to your highest bill every month is either your mortgage or your rent. The more housing we build with involvement from communities, and the only time that the state would intercede is if a developer, brings a project to an area, it makes all the sense in the world, and the community just says, no, we don't want any. Then that developer has another remedy to pursue. So we're not there from the beginning. We're simply saying, show us a plan of growth, 1% over the next 3 years. That is so doable. I think a lot of communities want to do a lot more than that.
Some have expressed a concern about building up outer ring suburbs in rural areas, and if we're talking about affordable housing, people having access to social services, and the NFTA has cut so many bus routes that could actually be an impediment for people down the road, an unintended consequence, if you will. So do you feel that there's really wiggle room, if you will, to not make it a mandate, but really incentivize local communities to adopt these affordable housing
What I would
specs?
say is, again, we're not just talking about affordable housing. I want to be very clear on that. We're talking about all levels of housing. But if a community wants to build, let's say 80% of communities in New York State, 80%, if they build 50 units, they've achieved the goal. But if they build affordable housing, that number gets knocked down to 25. That is one small apartment building, condos, a little townhouse community, one subdivision. It is not what people are thinking of. It's a very small number, but I'm looking at the state collectively. If every community does their share, 1% growth over 3 years, then we'll achieve over a decade the number I believe we have to have, and experts say we have to make sure that we don't stagnate. Because people want to live here, they want to raise their kids here, and businesses want to come here. Think about Micron, 50,000 new jobs. People will be living all over upstate with the supply chain opportunities. Buffalo, West York will benefit from this. We just brought 600 jobs to Batavia because they want to be close enough to Micron. Batavia is going to need to build more housing. Syracuse is going to need to build more housing. People want to live in Western New York. So communities that don't adapt and meet that need, they're not going to be able to expand their tax base. I'm all about reducing taxes. You build some more, you expand your tax base. So I think if people just dial back all the hysteria around this and realize the objective is beneficial to the community, that they'll partner with us on it.
Thank you for clarifying, Governor. Let's talk about gun-related violence. As you know, Buffalo has had such a tough year with the Tops mass shooting, an unspeakable tragedy with targeted racial violence, and you said that you really want to work to prevent future acts, and you have focused more on gun restrictions. We've heard from lawful gun owners who feel that restricting gun rights like the concealed carry really wouldn't stop a criminal. Has New York State really gone as far as it can reasonably with restricting gun access without looking at other things like mental health and other benefits to the community?
Oh, you're absolutely right about that. I mean, we have leaned so hard into mental health. We're the first administration since the 70s that have a very comprehensive, well-financed, $1 billion I'm putting toward dealing with the whole spectrum of mental health, the whole continuum of care that's necessary to help people, whether it's in schools. I want more money to go into our schools to help kids so they can get what they need now, so they don't end up being adults needing a lifetime of care. But also people that turn to crime and have substance abuse problems. We have to have more supportive housing for them. But with respect to the concealed carry, we had a law in the books for 108 years in the state of New York. It worked fine. Nobody complained about it. And the Supreme Court just threw it out last June, literally 6 weeks after we had the massacre at the Tops store. I'm not saying that it was a concealed carry weapon that was result, but it was also the fact that someone who's 18 years old could walk into a store, legally buy an AR-15, head down to Pennsylvania, minutes from his house, and buy a high-capacity magazine and stick it on and cause that mass slaughter in my hometown. I went back to the legislature and said, 18-year-olds should not be able to have access to these guns. We raised it to 21. We also made sure that there was more involvement in the background checks, make sure that people can't get guns who may have mental health problems and could do harm to themselves or others. Same thing with the red flag laws. Red flag laws are working incredibly well. I'm not looking to take away the rights of legitimate gun owners, and they should not think that I am, because we are not focused on that. We're focusing on preventing crime and making sure that people have the background, the training, and they've gone through a series of tests to make sure that they won't hurt other people if they have a gun. Otherwise, I understand the culture. Sporting, hunters, it's a big part of upstate New York in November. Everybody's out deer hunting, I know this. And so they have to understand, I know this, I know that area as well.
I want to talk really quickly about bail reform, because I know you have been a proponent of judges having more discretion, yes, but there doesn't seem to be an appetite in the legislature to make those changes to bail reform. How do you go about negotiating that and horse trading or whatever it is you need to do, because we're hearing from district attorneys and other judges who feel like it's not working in the best interests of the community?
Right, and I understand the fundamental premise behind the original bail reform laws, and I stand by them, because you had people accused of low-level offenses. If someone had money, or their parents had money, they could make bail, they go home. Someone accused of the same offense doesn't have money, they're sitting in jail waiting for a trial date. And during the pandemic, trials didn't go on for 2 years. And so people are sitting there languishing. They could end up being innocent for a low-level offense. What I have said, I support that, keep that in place. When we talk about serious crimes, violent offenses, cases involving guns, there has to be a different standard. So in our budget last year, I put in language that gave judges more criteria to look at. Is this the first offense? Is this a repeat offender? Was this a violation of an order of protection? Was a gun involved? So you can look at all these factors, but the only part that stayed in there was, at the same time, judges are supposed to consider whether or not this is the least restrictive means to make sure someone returns to court. So I'm saying this year, I put in standards last year, but we didn't take out this other one. So on balance, a judge could say, I wasn't sure which standard to use. Let's fix that. That's all I'm saying is we'll fix that. We'll put this to rest once and for all, give the judges the discretion they need to have to help keep our communities safe. That's what's important to me.
Is that something you feel confident, maybe through the budgetary process, that you can somehow incentivize the legislature to go along with that?
I'm working very hard, and I need people to reach out to their legislators, their senators, their assembly members, and say we support Governor Hochul's plan to make our streets safer, and also to give judges the discretion they want to have, give them the clarity they need. I'll keep working on gun safety, work closely with the legislature on gun safety laws. I'll do whatever I can to protect our streets, more money in my budget than ever before to help our law enforcement, help our district attorneys. I'm doing all that. I just need more clarity for our judges.
We've talked about the stadium ad nauseum. Some people still struggle with the stadium being built again in an affluent community and not in the city of Buffalo. It kind of harkens back to the decision to put the North Campus of UB way out in Amherst instead of downtown. What do you say to those people for them to feel better about it not being in the city and supporting the city of Buffalo and helping the old First Ward neighborhood and revitalize the city?
You know, this is a regional asset. You know, having 8 games played at a stadium, I don't know if that's the catalyst that Buffalo needs. We need to fix that neighborhood. I'm very focused on the Perry Street projects, revitalizing this area, having year-round, 24/7 activities in these areas. And I think that when we finally finish a project of that magnitude, people will look back and say the decision was made in a correct way to have it stay in Orchard Park. But there's also the owners who have a lot of say in this. We talked about the options from the very beginning. County Executive Poloncarz and the mayor talked about, does it make sense to go downtown? Studies were done. The Bills decided they wanted to stay right where they are. And that'll be very less disruptive. We can get the new stadium done sooner.
You couldn't compel Terry Pagula. I mean, he
No.
was getting a hugely subsidized stadium to build it downtown because it was better for the city.
Again, the analysis of 8 games a year. With a stadium that's otherwise occupying a tremendous amount of space, valuable downtown property if we do this right, I believe there's a better vision for that community. I put this out there. I talked to the community. I talked to the team about this. But the decision was made to stay where they are because otherwise, I guarantee there'd be litigation because people would be displaced from their homes who live there now. And we now just added years to the conclusion of this project. I have a team that I need to make sure would stay in Buffalo. Our deal that we structured, negotiated, it was intense. I got them to agree to stay for 30 years. 30 years, that's extraordinary. And staying where they are allows them to keep playing right up until the very end, go across the street, go into a brand new stadium. It's moving ahead very quickly. Some of the final steps, the commission, the Erie County Stadium Commission meets next week on the 15th. Then it goes to the county legislature, and then we can start construction. So I'm excited about this. I'm also just as excited about revitalizing the neighborhood that was identified as one of the sites that it could have gone, which is the First Ward. I see so much potential for that community. My family started in the First Ward, Irish immigrants, and I want that to be successful, and I know they can do better than having a building that's empty except for 8 times a year.
Gotcha. Finally, I just want to ask really quickly about the blizzard because we lost 47 Western New Yorkers. And having followed the storm obviously very closely, we were keenly aware that the National Weather Service 3 days before the wind started said things like once in a generation storm would slam the area, real threat of damaging 60 to 75-mile-an-hour winds, prolonged lake effect snow. The county executive, however, waited until Friday to put a driving ban into effect. Hindsight being 2020, should he not have started a driving ban earlier and ask you to bring the New York State Guard in to enforce that ban the day before people got on the road that day, to send a strong message to protect Western New Yorkers?
This was predicted to be a statewide event. The entire state was under a warning. So you don't know at that time exactly what area is going to be hit the hardest. I literally was sending out warnings Wednesday, Thursday. Thursday I was in Niagara Falls. I had a press conference that said, do all your shopping right now. Do not be on the roads tomorrow. It's going to be dangerous. So, and the county executive was doing the same. We gave out all kinds of messagings, and the media was great. The media was telling people that this was going to be very difficult. We shut down, we talked about a soft clip. It's very hard to tell Western New Yorkers before the snow starts falling to stay off the roads, because Western New Yorkers, it's like telling people in Florida it's time to evacuate when the hurricane's coming. A lot of people are going to wait and see what it really comes, because they get a lot of warnings. Now, that being said, we'll always look back. We're working closely together. I have a team working together to give us our after-action report so we can learn from every experience. And the loss of life is devastating. And to know that that happened, and yes, it was a once-in-a-century blizzard, but every life mattered. And the people who went out in the storm or were caught in the storm, and their families are changed forever. So we're going to make sure that we keep working together. We have money that we just allocated to the city of Buffalo, $10 million, so they could build up their storm response and get them a new public works garage, and make sure that they have the state-of-the-art equipment so they can respond faster as well.
Last question. What do you want history to write about you in your term as governor?
I love this state with all my heart and soul. I worked hard every day. And at the end of my term, I wanted people to say that, yes, she made our lives better. She gave us more opportunities, and she cared deeply. And because of that, we are a better place.
Thank you, Governor.
Thank you.